Recently, I managed to reach my newest highest floor in a public lobby while distracting. And in this video, I'll be giving you guys some tips on how you can do it too. This video actually came to me very unexpectedly, so unfortunately, I don't actually have the entire run recorded. This type of video is different than what I usually do, so sorry if the format of this video might be a little messy, but I thought that this information might be useful for anyone who wants their public runs to last a little longer. Now, the format of this video is mainly just me giving you guys some tips on what I personally do to find good runs, and in the background is just going to be me distracting in that run. Now, I know to the super tryhards out there that my highest floor isn't exactly super high or anything, but as you guys know, I am a public lobby warrior, and these public runs aren't exactly known for being the most coordinated. You kind of have to follow a different set of rules when distracting or extracting. Now, just a quick little disclaimer, this isn't always going to be true, and everything I'm about to say is just how I've personally experienced things. You may have a different experience than mine, so just take everything I say with a grain of salt. Looking for a run. Before I even load into a game, there are certain things I like to look for in the lobby. Now, the first of those things are the specific tunes. I like to look for tunes that are a little bit harder to get. Now, what I mean by this is that they have requirements that are a little bit more difficult. For example, I try to avoid tunes like Finn or Tisha. Now, don't get me wrong, these tunes are actually very good stat-wise and ability-wise. Obviously, I'm not saying that everyone who plays as these kinds of characters are bad. I'm not saying that at all, actually. But if they are a newer player, then they probably won't make it very far in the run. The next thing I like to watch out for are a lot of low stealth tunes. What I've noticed is that a lot of public lobby players seem to not know their stealth very well, and they end up getting hit a lot. I only mention this because I've noticed this especially with Yada players, which is kind of interesting since she is one of the best characters. The next thing I try to avoid are main only runs. Now, obviously, mains are very good, but the problem with public lobbies is that these runs typically don't last very long. I've noticed that people tend to die very quickly due to mains only having 2 HP. And not only that, these runs are pretty hard to get into due to the fact that everyone's arguing in the lobby about getting a poppy to get out of their run. But yeah, I just try to avoid these runs. But obviously, they can be very good in more organized runs. When looking at the entire team you're gonna join, make sure that the overall extraction of the team is good. I've noticed that lobbies that have many tunes with below average extraction don't tend to go very well, at least in my experience, and having a mix of supports like Sprout or V is a pretty good sign as well. Now, the next thing I like to look for in a lobby are the trinkets. I've made a small tier list here about the specific trinkets I think are a good sign when joining a lobby, and as you can see here, dog plush is in its own category. I don't really feel like getting too deep into how percentages work, but when it comes to a low speed tune, dog plush only increases your walk speed, and since that's already very low, it's just not going to be very good at all. The increase is so little, there's barely a difference. Now, besides these trinkets, I like to look out for sort of gimmicky trinkets. What I mean by this are specific trinkets that tie into a character's kit. For example, glazed fondant bag on Yada, or even peppermint icing on Rudy. While these trinkets might not be super meta or anything, it shows that that person has a good understanding of how that tune works, and I feel like that's a good sign that they might know what they're doing a little bit. Now, the reason why I like to look at tunes and trinkets before joining a run is because having good teammates is crucial to being able to get to high floors and for those floors to get done quickly. However, while both of these things are decent indicators that someone might be good at the game, of course, it's not always true. Now, you can obviously make it to floor 20 as a shrimpo, but when it comes to these public lobbies, I think it's better to look at things with a sort of baseline instead of looking at the exception. Because let's be honest, not everyone is making it to floor 20 as shrimpo, or even making it to floor 20 at all. Of course, when taking in these suggestions, don't openly judge or criticize anyone for having these quote-unquote bad trinkets. Most of the time, these people just don't know that their trinket setup isn't that good, and it's not their fault, so there's really no reason to be rude to them about it. So if there's a run you don't like, you should probably just leave. I do the same. Now for during the run. Now, what happens during the run, especially at the start, is probably just as important, if not more important, than the tunes or trinkets someone is using. So it's important to pay attention. Now, first thing, a distractor. Now, a distractor is not needed. I've actually been in runs where there was no distractor, and everyone actually avoided the twisteds pretty well, and the floors were getting completed pretty fast. So while it's not needed, it is recommended, and unfortunately, you probably will have to distract, and I'll go more into this in a bit. And as you can see in the background, I obviously did distract in this run. Anyway, an important thing I like to note is that, especially at the beginning of the run, is to look at the pace that machines are being completed. If machines are getting completed fairly quickly, especially on early floors, it's a pretty good sign that the run's going good, because it kind of just shows you that, everyone's a little locked in. And the second thing I like to look for is that there's no excessive arguing or toxicity in chat. Whenever I join runs like these where people are immediately arguing with each other, the run goes by very slow. People tend to just stand still typing and arguing instead of getting machines done, and they either just eventually end up leaving or dying to twisteds. So runs like these aren't very good in my opinion, so I would just leave if this is happening. On to distracting. Now, it's very important to note that not everyone can distract. I really do not recommend distracting if you have either bad Wi-Fi or a lower end device. Personally, I would know about this because I used to have super bad Wi-Fi. Fortunately, I got the situation fixed, but I used to get hit by the twisteds very easily. And for distracting, it just makes it super inconsistent because you'll never know when you're gonna get hit, so I wouldn't recommend it. And for people who are on lower end devices, the reason why I don't recommend distracting is because in blackouts, you may have this issue where the light does not follow you, and if you can't see where you're going, this is obviously very bad. If you do have this lighting issue where it's very bad, I would just avoid it. I personally have never had this issue, but I do have a friend who does experience this, and they are always complaining in calls about it. So yeah, as I mentioned previously, I did distract in my high floor run, and in my personal opinion, I think that Louis is the best option for distracting. However, there are other options that may better suit your playstyle, so you can always try and experiment and see who might work best for you. But I do think he's just generally the best due to the fact that he is the fastest and he has lower stealth than a majority of the tunes, which is good in public lobbies since it may not be super coordinated. Anyway, what I try to do is I immediately try to round up all the twisteds, and I try to go in open areas of the map, basically areas where I see the majority of the map. I'll try to make a little diagram of what I mean. So what I mean by trying to go in open areas is that, say I'm trying to leave elevator from here. Obviously, as soon as the elevator opens, I want to try and find the twisteds as fast as I can. And what I usually do is that I try to normally go in areas that have the most open space where I can see most of the map. So for example, if I path here, I can see areas of the map from here, over here. I can see through the window to see if anyone's back here. And I try to find the twisted like that. What I usually wouldn't do is something like this. I wouldn't try to go into the side where there's a narrow space. Obviously, if I enter the hallway here, all I'm going to see is spaces from this hallway and maybe into these rooms. Now, if you're lucky, maybe you will get the twisteds there, but if the twisteds aren't there, you'll eventually just have to go out and find the twisteds over here. And it wastes a lot of time, and if you are over here, your teammates might be off somewhere else trying to get twisteds off of them, so that's why I try to find the twisteds as fast as I can. Obviously, if the twisteds spawn right in front of elevator, you don't have to do all this, but it's just a general rule that I like to follow. But you may not agree with me, and that's alright. And then I just try to round the twisteds up. Now, you'll have to depend on your teammates to stay out of your way while distracting, but you also have to make sure that you're not in the way of teammates. I actually have this story where one time there was a pebble distracting at broken elevator and the last machine was right there. I was on Louis, I believe, but for some reason the pebble would not move and he kept getting mad at me for trying to do the last machine. Keep in mind, everyone on the team had lower stealth. Yeah, he eventually just gave up for some reason and I just called my friend over to do the machine while I distracted for some reason. But yeah, don't do this. You have to be more aware of your surroundings when you're distracting, especially of locations of machines or teammates. Sometimes you'll have to distract in an area that has machines around you. What I like to do sometimes is to distract in a certain spot for a while and then rotate to a different location once the machines in other locations are finished. And you really only have to do this if the other tunes have lower stealth or if they're too close to you, the same stealth. Also, pay attention to where your other teammates are, especially if they have the same or lower stealth as you, as to not lead twisted to them. This can be a little difficult as you can't always see where everyone is, but peeking around a corner can always help before committing to a turn. I'll show a quick little example here, but as you can see, I was about to enter into this room, but I looked into it and noticed that V was there, so I decided to turn back around. Now obviously I was on Sprout, so I could see the location of where she was, but if I was on someone else like Pebble, then it would still be the same. Another thing is that to make sure that while you're distracting, twisteds aren't lagging behind you. I've seen way too many public lobby distractors fail to keep track of twisteds and basically just lose twisteds and get their teammates hit. And I think this happens because they're probably looking forward and not looking behind them to make sure the twisteds are still on them. So just keep track of twisteds by frequently looking behind you, and when you notice a twisted is starting to lag behind you, you can do this sort of circling movement to round them up, or you can also do whatever this movement is called, a loop-de-loop. Now for what everyone has been waiting for. How to deal with Pebble. Now, in the past, I have had very bad experiences trying to distract Pebble, and he used to end a lot of my runs. Now, you have to remember, since this is a public lobby, it's very likely you don't have a backup distractor where someone will grab Pebble and the other person will grab everyone else. So, I found that there are 3 ways I like to go about approaching Pebble on a floor. The first way is to grab only Pebble and distract him on an isolated island. By distracting him on an island, he'll obviously get stuck around it while trying to chase you, and you won't lose that much stamina. I really only recommend doing this if there aren't many other twisteds on the floor. I'm talking like maybe 1 or 2 other twisteds. It's just so that you can hopefully avoid them getting onto you, because that can kind of mess up your island distracting. The second option is to distract all the twisteds except for Pebble. I mainly do this when there are quite a few twisteds, maybe 3 or more. You can do this by distracting in areas where Pebble is not at or where he cannot see you. But if you do it this way, make sure you know where he is at all times. I actually find this method a little bit more helpful than the first, because if you are playing with smart teammates, then they will probably be able to avoid Pebble fairly well due to the fact that he is a very large toon and you can hear where he's at. So hopefully they are able to avoid him while you grab the other twisteds. Also, this method is a little harder to do on smaller maps, so just keep that in mind. Maps that are large and more open are easier to do this technique on. And now for the third option, and that is to distract every single twisted on the floor, which is also known as jungle distracting. Now, I actually did manage to distract Pebble along with a bunch of other commons and uncommons during the run where I got my highest floor, but I don't have it recorded. Yeah, I'm super annoyed at myself for that, but I promise I did do it. You know, I wouldn't lie about that. But here's how I managed to pull it off. First off, since I was playing on Louis, I tried to get hit immediately during the floor so that I could be on 1 heart, since you do have to be very fast for this. A mistake I used to make while trying to jungle distract is distracting on 2 hearts for a bit, wasting quite a bit of my stamina, getting hit, then dying soon after since I had no stamina left. So yeah, don't do this, just get on 1 heart as soon as you can so you have the most stamina. Then you have to make sure that your inventory is full of boxes of chocolates. Bottle of pops are also good too, but I prefer the bocolates. You really only want to try doing this on a map that has a large area where it's also very hard to cut line of sight on others. You really don't want the Twisteds getting on other people while you're doing this. And I would know a thing or two about that. When you're jungle distracting, once you have everyone rounded up, I would try to pace your stamina in a way that lets you regenerate it a tiny bit each time. The point of doing this is to basically stretch out your stamina for as long as possible, and when you get low, eat a chocolate or two. This is a little hard to explain since I don't have it recorded, so sorry if I'm a little unclear. Also, if you have V on your floor, I don't recommend jungle distracting Pebble with V. Obviously, it is possible with a coordinated team, but you can't exactly reach that level of coordination in a public server with random people that you don't know. So I would avoid jungle distracting V and Pebble altogether. Now, if you guys are curious as to the conditions of the floor I jungle distracted Pebble on, then I'll tell you. I believe the floor was somewhere in the high 20s, maybe low 30s. I had 2 boxes of chocolates and a bottle of pop, and I used all my items for that one floor. Despite it only being Pebble and 5 or 6 other Twisteds, that floor still took decently long, obviously since it is a public server. The other tunes on that floor, I believe, were Ginger, Flight, Flutter, and a Gordy. I actually remember that Gordy hiding in one area of the map because if he got seen, it would have been pretty bad. But yeah, I was able to successfully stretch out my 2 boxes of chocolates and a bottle of pop during that floor. And you have to remember, you kind of have to do that because obviously it's not going to be completed super fast. Don't get me wrong, they were completing the machines at a fairly good pace, but compared to a full team of people like Shelly or someone else, it's obviously not as quick. So yeah, just make sure you remember that for public lobbies. Finally, on to extracting. Now, extracting is actually just as important as distracting because obviously the entire game revolves around getting machines done. So how do we be a good extractor for our team? Now, you want to have a good idea of the map layout and where the machines spawn. And the only way to really learn this is just by playing the game in general. Typically, what I like to do is a sort of sweeping motions when I try to find machines. For example, say we're entering from this elevator. I like to sort of sweep the map from right to left, or left to right, it doesn't matter. But basically, I just path in a way that ensures that I can check every single room just to make sure that there are no machines that are hiding from me. I'll check over here and obviously see through the window. And then maybe I'll go and check in each of the rooms because sometimes there can just be a machine that's hidden away and nobody can find it. This way, machines can be found very quickly and there's no need to aimlessly wander the map, which will slow down your floor progression. Now, when it comes to the later floors, I actually like to leave the machines near the elevator undone and go to the back areas and finish the ones near the back first. This just makes it easier for the distractor because by the time all the machines are finished, the ones near the elevator are the last ones to be done, so everyone can get in the elevator and the distractor can get in too. Also, if you are an extractor, just make sure to be aware of your distractor if you do have one, and make sure to stay away from them if you have similar or lower stealth. There's not too much to say about extracting as a role, as most of it is fairly intuitive, but I still hope that some of these tips helped you out. One thing I do want to note is that V is now a very good tune for floor progression. She recently got a buff where she can highlight all machine locations for other players on top of all the Twisteds. And because of this, people can just quickly go to the machines without having to wander and find them. And it's also very good for distractors to round up the Twisteds quickly. Eventually, the run did end, but not to what you'd think. So everyone was actually avoiding the dial card like the plague. I actually personally didn't mind getting dial, but everyone else didn't really want him, so it was whatever. But eventually, some of you may or may not know, the cards do run out. And this was actually my first time seeing these cards run out. I actually have never gotten to this point before, so it was pretty interesting to see. And the very last card there was Dial's card. Unfortunately, we had a blackout on that floor, and then my entire team started dying. And by the way, by that point, there were only 3 other people in the run, that being Flutter, Flight, and Ginger. Now, hypothetically, I could have distracted the commons so that my teammates would be able to do the floor, but I'm not gonna lie, this Halloween event is kind of milking me dry, so I decided to be a little greedy and do some of the machines for the pumpkins. And after I finished that floor, I decided to end the run and get myself popped. And that is all for today's video. As you can see here, my highest floor climbed is 44. I hope you guys found some of the tips useful, and please do remember that these are just some tips that I personally follow. You might not agree with me or want to follow them yourself, and if not, that's alright. If you do have any thoughts on that though, feel free to let me know down below. A while back, I remember someone telling me that I should try out a private server run instead of these public lobbies, since, you know, public lobbies are a little rough sometimes. But, you know, I think that there's a certain charm to public lobbies that you just can't get anywhere else. I mean, in just this run alone, there was a flutter in our team, which, first of all, I feel like I rarely see flutters these days, but also a flutter making it to floor 43. Very interesting. Also, I think sometimes it's a little funny to see the public lobby shenanigans that are going on. So, yeah. Maybe one day I will try out a Discord run, but maybe that's for a video or something. I don't know. I'm a little scared to play with strangers, okay guys? Alright, in all seriousness, I hope you guys enjoyed today's video, and if you did, make sure to leave a like and subscribe down below. And that's all for today.